Hello and welcome to another installment of At the Podium with me, Patrick Huey. At the Podium is a platform where we will learn from people who come from different walks of life, careers, and experiences, but all share one thing in common. They have stepped fully into the transformative power of saying yes to the unexpected turns of their lives, and they are now using the power of their voice, or a podium, to make an impact on the world we live in today. At the Podium is the intersection of art, culture, and big thoughts wrapped up in good old-fashioned conversation. Today, I'm thrilled and humbled to share the podium with Gamal Palmer. Gamal is the principal and founder of Conscious Builders, and he is also the founder of the Diversity Gym. A graduate of the Yale Drama School and a student of Oxford University with a strong background in organizational leadership and inclusion, Gamal has worked with hundreds of leaders, executives, and CEOs to help them diversify their teams and increase effectiveness and collaboration. He's worked with large-scale businesses and nonprofits, including Sempra Energy, Live Nation, Intuit, Yale, and USC Business School, to name a few. Through the Diversity Gym, he's worked with thousands of individuals to help them find acceptance and foster inclusion. Gamal sits on 3 national boards: Upstart Lab, Jews of Color Initiative, and American Jewish World Service. As a speaker, his TEDx and multiple talks focus on utilizing social impact and authenticity, becoming your power. So Gamal, welcome to At the Podium. I'm so happy we could make this happen today.
I'm so glad to be here. This is great. I love the platform that you're creating, and that even more people are gonna be able to benefit and experience your awesomeness. So happy to be here.
That's the point, not my awesomeness, but to hopefully benefit, manifest some happiness and joy in the world.
But isn't that a part of your awesomeness, is that you do that so authentically, and you're consistent, right? Like, and that's a part of the awesome experience of being a friend of yours or a colleague, is that you are so good at bringing joy and even questioning and pushing back on things in a way that is inspiring.
Well, you're going to make me blush, so thank you. I'll be turning red in a minute.
Waiting.
Today, we are talking about you. So you and I are part of that nexus of people known as the Yale Mafia, which kind of is how we became familiar with one another. You came after me at school, so we never crossed over there, but our lives in California have brought us together professionally and personally, which is so awesome. And one thing that I love about your story, Gamal, is that your mission for social impact and social justice and your love for theater began in 8th grade.
Yes, my social justice work and my activism that has really led to what I'm doing now, which is working with companies on systems change work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the work that I do now really did start back then when I was in 8th grade, working for a improvisational, intergenerational, social impact theater company. And we would go into prisons and work with inmates on helping them to process and even build kind of skills and different habits around surviving in prison and being healthy and well in prison. And then also there was a lot of exercises and discussions around how to maintain a way of being, so when you're out of prison, you stay out of prison.
You were working with the group, but you weren't going to the prisons. And then one day someone dropped out or got sick and they called you, and you basically were the understudy. You subbed in, and that's how you realized that you had this love of performing. But you also talk about it in relation to your life now, that was the first time that the idea and maybe you didn't have the language at the age of 12 to talk about it this way, but the idea of mentorship entered your consciousness.
Yeah. So the way the story goes is that you're correct. You had all the pieces right. The company not worked in prisons and also at foster care centers or other specific populations that had certain kinds of challenges. And I had not yet done the work in the prisons, right? And I had just joined the company, and someone at the very last minute couldn't go, and so, you know, and there's like a training, of course, from logistics to like how you interact with inmates, et cetera. And so I didn't get that training, I didn't get that orientation, and I show up and I'm in shorts and a tank top. You are really not allowed to wear certain things that could be provocative to the inmates. And also, on top of that, I only had my library card for an ID. So I don't know. I mean, all I remember, it's like sort of faint, but you know, they called my mom probably, and whatever verification happened that was needed happened, right? And they knew the group, so I think that helped as well. And so, and then I had to, they gave me a pair of inmate pants to wear, and now they were yellow inmate pants. And so I was there, and we did the whole workshop. And I imagine many people have an image in their mind of like what a scary or dangerous prison person, right, looks like. And for me, while this was all very exciting, I also had my own concerns and fears. And there was a guy sitting in the back row, and he embodied this image that I had, you know, going, this preconceived notion, bias. And he didn't say anything the entire time, just completely silent, stoic. And during the debrief, he raises his hand and he says, "I want to thank you, because for an hour and a half, I felt like I wasn't in prison no more."
Hmm.
And in that moment, as you said, I didn't have language for it then, but that was really the beginning of me understanding that the time that we spend on this planet can be spent impacting people, allowing people to share their stories, to explore who they are, to get connected to their humanity. And I, like any teenager, you know, had my ups and downs and challenges, but that I held on to that. And I always continued to pursue that experience, that feeling that we can bring somebody else's humanity out, and we can actually help them liberate themselves.
In the moment of you guys making art together, the theater company that you were with, you were able to, in some way, in that particular person, validate his existence and see him in a way that perhaps he couldn't even see himself, and definitely in a way that the system, for whatever reason, didn't see him. And I think that's powerful.
Thank you. I grew up in a neighborhood that's very special. I talk about this a lot in workshops and consulting, you know, especially when I'm working with executives and CEOs, and particularly in this time around with such an emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And leaders are really grappling with how to do this, right? Like how do I be more inclusive? How do I not make a mistake? How do I speak? Like what am I allowed to say, right? And one of the examples that I use when working with folks is about the neighborhood that I grew up in, it's called Westbound area in Philadelphia. My parents moved to Westbound area in Philadelphia because it was a neighborhood where a lot of biracial couples were moving to at that time in the early mid 70s. And my parents are biracial. My father's a civil rights activist. My mom is an activist in her own right. She started one of the first needle exchanges in the country. So rather than like going to soccer practice on a Saturday morning, I was going with my mom to needle exchange to exchange. This is where you can, a person who is a heroin addict or who does heroin can exchange dirty needles for clean ones to prevent the spread of HIV. It's also an opportunity to get other resources and support. So anyways, that's the environment that I grew up in. But West Mount Airy, back to my point, and more specifically, West Mount Airy, Jewish people, Christian people, Black people, biracial people, right? And it's still, even to this day, known for pretty much being famous for being this very much so diverse neighborhood, middle to upper middle class neighborhood. The things that people built together, the way in which they take care of that neighborhood, the way that people feel about that neighborhood that live there, is largely because it's a place where all of these different perspectives and these different opinions and ways of living and ritual and religion, right, can coexist. And so what would it look like if our companies were able to mirror a West Mount Airy? What would it look like? What would it take for us to have a place where a company where we're bringing in the skill sets, the perspectives, right, the mind frames and life experiences, really, of different people to help innovate our ideas or to help solve our problems, right? You're going to have a much larger impact. And I think that I've kind of always been that way, right? I've always been curious about how can I help people by simply allowing them to be who they are, even when we disagree, right? And that's just been a theme in my life.
You're biracial. You have one parent who is Jewish, one parent who is not. How did you locate your identity within that? We all struggle with issues of identity, being a person of color in America. You still are probably labeled as a Black person by a person who's looking at you from the outside, and you don't even have the option or the choice, realistically, to say, no, I'm going to embrace the other half of my story. And to a certain degree, you do, because of the work you do around your Jewish heritage. So how did you locate yourself within that and sort of find your way through?
It has been and still is a journey. I've certainly arrived to a lot more clarity and confidence around who I am and my identity. You ask the question, how did I have the balance, or how did I locate myself, given that I come from multiple identities? And when I was a kid, it was really, in one sense, not a problem, because again, of where I grew up in this neighborhood, West Mount Airy. But I was starting to be sent to private schools in fourth grade that were like an hour outside of where I lived. And being placed in these homogenous and very wealthy environments, which we were not very wealthy at all. My mom, who had 4 children with my father, was raising us largely on her own. And so there was a lot of confusion around what was valuable and values and what mattered, and, you know, being Black in those spaces, and a lot of questioning of, you know, like, that I would do, because people would say things like, oh, well, you know, you seem like a good kind of Black person. And this is like in the 80s, you know, where they can, not to age myself, but, you know, where they can, where people were saying stuff like that, right? And so as a kid, how I internalized that often was like, okay, I must be doing something right, so let me do more of that, and let me speak more well, right? Let me act more proper. But my point here is that that was all very confusing, and had major impact on me. And I use a lot of those stories again when I'm consulting and stuff like that. I created a workshop which has kind of started my diversity and inclusion work, officially called Diversity Gym. And it's essentially that we're all at different levels of our fitness when it comes to the conversation of biases and prejudices and racism. And so we're working out the conversation together. And you gain tools that would be like to spot each other rather than spar when you get triggered, and how to increase empathy as a skill set. And I think that, for me, it's like I've always just really wanted to be understood. I was the only observant or person in my family of my siblings who identified as Jewish. My siblings didn't understand that. And it was more of like, oh, you're just doing that because mom is Jewish, even though she's wasn't even practicing, right? So, and then I came out when I was 14. So all of these pieces for me made identity really challenging and really exciting. It has been the centerpiece of my conversation for my whole life, because my work and my efforts in terms of philanthropy and social impact, everything all comes down to identity.
So when we were at school together, not together, but at the same school at different times, we would do a Chekhov scene our first year, and the teacher would turn to you at the end of the scene and say, who are you and what do you want? You've kind of been answering that question your whole life.
Yeah, I've been asking myself that question my whole life. Age 5, I remember having conversations with our neighbor, Mr. Bob. And I would sit and talk to Mr. Bob for hours, like outside on his porch, right? And ask all these questions. And he was always like, what do you, what? Why are you thinking about this stuff? And he was an older white guy, and he lived with another white male. And it never, ever dawned on me until I was, I think I was like about to graduate high school or something. And I had already moved away from that area, but I went back just to say hi to some people. And Miss Dottie, who lived on the first floor of this townhouse, I said, "Oh, so what happened to Mr. Bob?" And the other guy who I didn't even know, she said, "Oh, well, he passed away, and the roommate left, and she's like, but who knows what they were doing up in that apartment." And so it dawned on me like, oh, so they were gay. Somehow at a very early age, I was gravitating to other people as a mentor who also had an identity-based conversation, right? And for these two men to be living together, and they were older when I was a kid, right? So like when they were younger, just this cyclical thing around who are we and what are we doing here, and how can we be allowed to be who we are? How can I as a leader lead in the ways that I want to lead? How as I as an artist, or as a biracial person, or a gay person, or a Jewish person, how can I do that in a way that is authentic and also invites people in, as opposed to making them feel threatened, or they're being contradicted, or something's missing? So these are the kinds of questions that I've been asking myself my whole life.
It's interesting, this idea of identity, because we are in a cultural moment where identity is everything, to the good and to the detriment of the collective that we all share on the planet right now. What does the world look like if we don't have to be defined by all of these? I'm wearing a Banana Republic shirt. I live in Irvine. You live in Los Angeles. You went to Yale. I mean, we are label heavy, and it's crushing us as a world. Because to your point, I just want to sit on the porch at 5 years old and talk about my experience authentically with someone who understands me. And it doesn't matter, it shouldn't matter who that person was, who they sleep with, who they choose to build a life with. And we're just like, we're crushed under the yoke of just these albatrosses of identity that are just strangling us.
Yeah. And we do it over and over again to ourselves and to other people. I mean, we all have biases. We all have prejudices. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, it's okay. Right? Like, it's all right. And in fact, you're going to be better off if you actually accept that reality, because then you have a place to start from. I think that that so much of what happens is we're playing out the oppressions that are put onto us, even in the most simplest of ways. Of, again, when we don't like people because of what they're wearing, or because of how they do their hair, or because of the way that they talk, or because what they're referencing, the examples that they use when they're explaining something, or, I mean, the list goes on of things that are relatively superficial. I really think, Patrick, that a lot of this sort of, or this journey that people go on, right, and questioning around, like, how can I be more of who I am, or how can I even just be who I am, and it comes from this thing that we're taught. In order for us to be good, or to be great, or to have power, there have to be others who are not good, who are not great, and who should not have power. Right? We talk more about racism. We talk more about anti-Semitism, about homophobia, Islamophobia, xenophobia, right? Misogyny. And so I always try to urge people to look at some of those larger, like, systemic issues that we talk about, to see how those issues actually inform our habits of when we try to socialize, because that's really ultimately where it is like, I want to belong, right? And so how can I accept myself enough so that I feel like I have the right to be here? How can I accept myself enough so that not only do I feel like I have the right to be here, but I do the things that I dream about, I do the things that I say I want to do.
So Gamal, who is Patricia Gross, and why is she important in your life? You speak about her very poignantly in one of your talks. It wasn't your TED talk, but in one of your talks, it was a university, I believe. You spoke about this woman, Patricia Gross, and you situate her in your life as sort of that pivotal moment. One of those moments on the course where you said yes to a new way of thinking about theater and what theater could or couldn't do, and social activism.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for whatever research you did, or for even presencing her. Patricia Gross was a huge mentor and influencer of mine in college. I was at the University of Miami for acting, and in my first year there, it just wasn't going great. I was really coming into, like, my Black maleness now that I had moved away from home, and had that freedom, like this new sense of freedom. But I had started to, like, not identify as biracial and start to identify as Black. And so the faculty there, a few teachers, that I really did support me, and we really connected. But overall, the experience it wasn't a match. And so, but Patricia Gross, who was a theater teacher, but in the bachelor, like the BA, the liberal arts department, whereas I was in the conservatory. And Patricia Gross, who was very proud of her Irish culture, she would introduce me to new plays and to young writers who weren't known and who were doing, like, really inspiring and meaty stuff. And as I was grappling with, like, do I want to be in this conservatory, or do I want something broader, she was like, you just have to soar. You just have to spread your wings and just soar. And really quickly, there's a thing called the Miami Circle. And the Miami Circle was uncovered when they were going to do one of the largest, at that time, one of the largest probably a condo building or some sort of like skyscraper. It was right at the mouth of the river. But Patricia wrote a play called Mouth of the River. And she asked me to play the lead role, Eddie, who is this guy who's like born at the mouth of the river, and he's like this protector of the river. And so she gave me that role, but it was my liberation. It really became my first big moment to say, I'm not going to go this traditional way. I'm going to, and I'm not going to do like the way things are supposed to. I'm going to design my own life.
Didn't you write a one-person show?
Yes, I wrote a one-man show called Mosaic. So I ended up designing a public health course for Yale, where we brought public health and pre-med students to Swaziland and South Africa. There's a lot of trauma, particularly in countries like Swaziland, where 29% of the population was infected with HIV. And people who were working in the public health industry, a lot of people, they didn't live a life where they planned on working in the public health industry. It was in response to the epidemic. And so there are people who, were caretakers who had to work with people dying and then go home, and family members would be essentially dying at home, if not actually dead. We were doing work at the intersection of public health and theater for social change. And I got to work with some really brilliant people in the UN. We partnered with the UN and with embassies, et cetera. And so, but I started hearing stories of people, and particularly, Swazi men, African men from Swaziland, or African men from South Africa. And I wanted to be able to share some of those stories. So I interviewed over like 100 men in North America and about 3 or 4 different African countries. And I played 12 of them. And it was this mosaic of I could say African male and American Black male experience. And it was for the World Performance Project that I did that for.
You've had a lot of experience in Africa. I think you've worked in 15 different countries, Middle East, obviously the US. How have those experiences molded you as a human being, but also within the work that you're doing? How has that impacted and molded and shaped that?
I feel like one of the fortunate people who were able to, as a Black man, to be able to have the opportunity to go to any African country where you are no longer a minority. It is daunting. It's a very weird feeling to be in a country where everybody's Black. That wholeness that I was able to feel was very empowering and gave me a kind of flavor of confidence. So I think I went from egotistical to confident.
When my career took me to Jamaica, and I lived in the Caribbean for 4 years, it was similar to your African experience, where it was the first time in my life I was not in the minority. And the entire paradigm, your entire awareness of yourself shifts when you're relieved of that thought, that awareness that we often have as American Black people. So I think it's a very important and liberating experience for us to have.
Yeah.
It gives you a very different perspective on the world, and it does, and it's a subtle change, but going from ego to confidence is it's a huge journey, though a subtle one.
Yeah, and it takes work.
Confidence, it's substantive and it's highly attractive.
Yes.
Where ego can sometimes be a repellent.
Yes.
So confidence is very, very, it draws into itself, which I think is really fantastic. I have one more question for you, because a lot of our focus here is about those moments in people's lives when they've had to say yes to something that they weren't expecting or anticipating saying yes to, and how that sort of changed the trajectory of where they were going. What is that moment, or a moment, where you said yes to something that you were really afraid of, and what fruit did that yield for you?
Yeah, I know exactly what it is. And I love this question because it hasn't really been posed to me like this before. So the question is, what is a decision or an opportunity that was put before me that I was intimidated by or maybe scared of or something? And I said yes, and it changed the course of my life. Would be saying yes to going to Yale for a fourth year. So I when I was graduating, by the time I was graduating, I was already teaching on campus with one of my professors. I was running the Swaziland course. I was working in Kenya and Tanzania, and also getting my MFA at Yale School of Drama, which, for those who don't know, like, the program is literally designed for you to do nothing but Yale School of Drama. What's really great, what's really interesting about this whole scenario, and I've since been able to talk to James Dean Bundy, who's been doing a phenomenal job running the drama school and who's gone through his own evolution as a leader and is very visible and vocal about it. So the Swaziland course that we posed, we were like, so excited because we had this proposal, we had our partners like the UN, the embassy, this, that, and we had our budget, right? And we're like, we got the meeting, like, he's going to listen to us, he's going to say yes. And we go through the whole thing, and he's like, this all sounds really great, but who's going to pay for it? And we were like, well, you are, right? and he said, no, we don't have those resources. And so we scoured the university, if you will, and were able to figure out how to make it work through the undergrad department. But fast forward 3 years later, I'm now doing all these things. I'm about to graduate, right? And I'm doing all of this leading and teaching and everything. And he calls me, and I'm like, why is Dean Bundy calling me, right? Like, that's not a thing. And I go to the office. I go to the office, and he says, I want to know if you want to come to Yale for a fourth year. And he said, I want to see if you want to take classes at the School of Management and also through theater management to really hone your administrative skills and your producing acumen, et cetera. Because you clearly aren't interested in acting, and we believe in you and we want to invest in you, and you could, produce something here. Maybe you could create a course for the drama school. So that no from 3 years ago became a massive yes in that moment. And as you know, when you're going to graduate from the acting program at the Yale School of Drama, you're going to do this thing called the league scenes. And the league scenes are essentially the introduction, it's to show all the casting agents and and other agents, et cetera, managers, your work, so you can sign with somebody and have a career. And my whole life, like, at that point, I'd really only been an actor. And so this would mean I'd be foregoing all the opportunity that comes your way from doing the league scenes, because I would be in school the next year. So there's no saying yes to agents and managers and stuff. I remember I went to South Africa and sat on the beach. And I was like, I'm going to do this. And I remember, like, super clearly, and because I still had some interviews that I was doing, and for this theater project, I was working on, Mosaic. And I came back and I did the year, and it was the hardest year of my life. And the program that I designed in partnership with Faye Simpson, who is a good friend and professor of mine from Yale, was called The Quest for Social Justice Through Music, Theater, and Religion. And we partnered with the Yale Divinity and Yale Drama School and brought graduate students to Tanzania to work with imams and Christian leaders and Muslim sheikhs around conflict resolution and healing. And the rest is history.
That is That's pretty spectacular, Gamal. And I know that part of your life, and the part that I've never put together until now is that that additional year meant that the work that we all build towards, which is that league scene, you had to make a conscious choice to say no to that and all that meant, which I think, but look what life gave you and what you're in your work doing, giving to the world, which needs your voice right now.
Thank you. Yes. And I mean, you said it for me, but to answer your question after talking for 10 minutes, to answer your question, saying yes to going to the School of Management for that 4th year, for that extra year, it meant that it gave me the skill sets, it gave me the context to be able to now consult or, over time. I mean, I built up to this, but, that credibility alone of, having gone to the School of Management, even for a year, and that learning that I was able to do, and then to hone as I slowly built up consulting work over the years and took on different projects and worked for companies as well, absolutely is what allowed me to really find my path and to find my passion.
I think the beauty of what you said, and I think it's a lesson for everyone to take away, is that saying yes is not always easy. And it doesn't come without a sacrifice, but you have to have the ability to see or imagine, or maybe not, what can be on the other side. And it sometimes means that you have to let go of something, and letting go, there's always somewhat of a pain or a loss, but accrues to you as the benefit, which you just described. The privilege of being happy in your work and loving it is, that's priceless.
Priceless indeed. And I think about you and your journey and all that you've gone through to be able to hone your skills and to be able to play the role that you play in such a large company, and to lead teams and to make the kinds of decisions that you make that impact thousands and thousands of people, and bringing beauty and bringing health to people and wellness to people. While it's hard, I know it's hard because you've told me, and there are challenges that you have to navigate like anybody. And then also that you're a man of color, who is, I'm sure, questioned in ways that are not necessary, but yet nonetheless happen. At the end of the day, you get to be able to create beauty and to inspire people. And that's why I'm so proud of you. And I'm so honored to be a guest on this show.
Well, you raised the bar just by showing up, my friend. And I thank you. I thank you 1,000% for your time today and your willingness to share your voice and wisdom with us. And I'm beyond grateful that you gave us some time today.
Thank you. Anytime.
Remember, we all have a voice. Use yours wisely.